This is the web transmission service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. On March 9th, forecasting expert and geopolitical commentator Balkan Devlen of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and Carleton University gave a talk on the theme, "Is Canada really back?" on what Canadians think our foreign policy ought to be.
Well, good evening. My name is Dr. Daniel Eustace. I'm the Director of the Defense and Security Studies Program for the Royal Canadian Military Institute, and I welcome you to our third speaker event for 2021. The first two events of this year focused on states which have and do present challenges to Canada, specifically Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. We had four excellent speakers over those two events. We had Marcus Kolga, Jonathan Manthorpe, and James Trottier and Pierre Pallavi. We learned a great deal about those four states and specifically what are the challenges to Canada. The question we want to try and address tonight to some extent is how do we actually address those challenges? When the current federal government was elected, the Prime Minister said at that time that Canada is back. And the intention for Canada was to contribute to the international community and international organizations, contribute to peacekeeping, to support gender rights and equality, feminist foreign policy, and many other things. So the question in my mind, and in the question that we wanted to discover tonight was, well, are we really back? And at the root of that, I suppose, is a question of perception. What do Canadians really want from their foreign policy in respect to those challenges, whether posed by other states or imposed by ourselves? Fortunately, many of the answers to this question are the very subject that tonight's speaker, Dr. Balkan Devlen, set out to discover. And he's going to share this with us this evening. Now, Balkan comes to us tonight courtesy of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, but in fact, he has a wide range of affiliations and expertise. He's a researcher, he's an educator, he's a speaker, and he's an author with almost 2 decades of international experience across 3 continents. As I mentioned, he's a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. He's the director of the Center in Modern Turkish Studies, the Norman Patterson School of International Affairs at Carleton University. And something I'm really interested in is he's a super forecaster for Good Judgment Incorporated. He speaks and writes and teaches on 2 broad themes, both of which we are very interested in, of course. One is geopolitics from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, especially the foreign and security policies of Russia and Turkey. But he's also interested in things like best tools for dealing with uncertainty. And no doubt, our current situation with COVID-19 is very definitely a situation with a great deal of uncertainty. He wants us to help make better decisions when the stakes are high, from probabilistic forecasting and wargaming, strategic thought, foresight, and scenarios. He was previously associate professor in the Department of Political Science in the University of Copenhagen, a Marie Curie Fellow, Black Sea Young Reformers Fellow, and 11 Institute Fellow. So well qualified not only to conduct the research that he has done so on behalf of Macdonald-Laurier, but to speak to us tonight. Now, following his presentation, you'll have the opportunity to engage him with questions. I will moderate that Q&A session, and you'll see that you have the ability to pose questions either via the Q&A function or the chat function, and you can do that at any time during this presentation. At the end of his presentation, I'll do my best to address as many of these questions as possible, time permitting. Could I now turn the virtual floor over to our esteemed guest, the Royal Canadian Military Institute, Dr. Balkan Devlen. Balkan, welcome.
Thank you very much, Dan. Thanks for having me here. And it's a pleasure to talk to the members of the RCMI tonight on a very important set of questions on how to find our way in an increasingly uncertain and dangerous world. Let me start sharing my my screen quickly with you all. So tonight, the data that I will be presenting is based on a public opinion survey we carried out at the end of September, early October in 2020, in partnership with Konrad Adenauer Stiftung by Macdonald-Laurier Institute. As a part of our project that we carried out last year, Canada's place in the world and how Canada can play a greater role in the international affairs. So the story here that I will be telling comes from that. And at the end of this presentation, I do provide links to full data as well as my commentaries that I have written on them. We had 3 releases with regards to the data with various questions, so we couldn't get it at once. Tonight, what I will be presenting is only a subset of them. So I'll try to select a few questions, a few themes to focus on and to talk about on Canada's role in the world and how Canadians think what should Canada's foreign policy be in this increasingly uncertain world. So once again, thank you very much for inviting me here. And before I start, maybe a quick explanation with regards to the so-called super forecaster thing. It is as a part of a IARPA, U.S. Intelligence Advanced Research Projects activity, had a geopolitical forecasting competition back in 2011, 2015. And about 20,000 people took part. We forecasted over 400 questions on geopolitics, from whether Maduro would continue to be the president of Venezuela, to whether there will be war in the Middle East, to all sorts of other questions. And I was part of a team called Good Judgment, and we won the tournament. And among those groups, about 2% of us, roughly about 150 people out of 20,000 people, were consistently accurate over 4 years. And thus IARPA people nicknamed us the super forecasters, and thus the name stuck. I continue to work with Good Judgment, which now have a commercial spin-off as a consultant and a forecaster as well. So that's the province of that title. So it's not something I gave it to myself. But let me start here. Apologies. Here we go. Today. I divide the presentation into two parts. The first part deals with the Canadians' views on international affairs, more broadly about our allies, about the adversaries, and how Canadians view them, as well as their views on a variety of international organizations. I select a few questions here tonight to focus on, and I'll be happy to provide the rest of the data and expand on the methodology of the poll in the Q&A if there is an interest. The first part will be on the views on international affairs, and the second part on what to do. That is, Canadians' view on what Canadian foreign policy should be, what kind of policies we should follow, who should we ally with, and what kind of policies we should be following in international affairs. So those are going to be the two parts. I will start each part with the key takeaways for the following section, and then individually would go over the data briefly. For the international affairs views, when we look at how Canadians view international affairs, the first thing that jump up, and I will show up the data in a minute, is that Canadians don't think Canada is back. Dan opened up the conversation with a reference to the 2015 speech by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau that Canada is back. When we ask Canadians, as you shall see in the results in a minute, they do not necessarily think Canada is back, but they do want Canada to be back. That is, they want Canada to be more influential, more active in international affairs. Next important takeaway that to keep in mind from this is is that for Canada, the two countries that Canadians have the most negative view are China and Russia. They're so close. I mean, the numbers are within the margin of error that it's hard to figure out which one is worse, to be frank. And what is more, I will talk in a minute on that. What is more striking here is the fact that the views on China dramatically changed over the past couple of years, and perhaps at its lowest today. These numbers might even be further down since we did the poll back in October. Canadians also have a more neutral view for a number of close partners that Canada have due to their complicated set of history that includes India, Taiwan, Israel, Ukraine, and Latvia. I will talk more specifically on Ukraine and Latvia in a minute. Those are two countries in Europe that Canada has involvement. Of course, in Latvia, as you all know, Canada is one of the framework nations in the Enhanced Forward Presence and has the headquarters and the command of the Enhanced Forward Presence in the multinational battalions in Latvia. So we ask about that, and Canada is also very much involved with the democratization and institutional building efforts in Ukraine as well. Most importantly, Canadians have the most positive views for our allies in advanced democracies, and that's an important point that I will come later on. This emphasis on working with and together with democracies has been a constant theme across this polling results. Japan, Germany, UK, South Korea, Australia. Australia has the highest level of net positive impressions by Canadians of any country that we ask. We ask about 15 countries. And lastly, the key point when you look at Canadians' views about international affairs in general, we ask a number of questions on their views on a number of international organizations, and the results are quite clear. There's broad support across provinces, across different demographics. There's broad support and positive views towards our traditional allies, both in the transatlantic space with NATO, but also within the Five Eyes intelligence community that is composed of United States, UK, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. So as you shall see, those are the top two organizations that Canadians had the most positive views. But before getting into our results, we would like to see what you think about some of these questions. So there will be a number of questions that we will be directing to you and get your ideas. So you will see in a minute a poll popping up on your screen. So we'll be very happy if you go ahead and vote on that poll. How important for you is that Canada to be more influential on the world stage? When everyone had a chance to think about it, how influential Canada is today, and whether it is how important for you for Canada to play a more influential role in international affairs going forward. So this is an aspirational question. How important it is for you to think that Canada plays a more influential role than it plays today going forward in the next years ahead. So if you have a chance to vote, maybe we can sort of wrap it up in 15 seconds and then see the results. Very good. 42% of the audience says it's very important, and 58% says it's moderately important. And we have 0% on both of the remaining of the categories, not very important or not important at all. Now, of course, this is a biased selection. We have people here who are interested in international affairs, but it's quite nice to see that the difference is it, should Canada be more influential? It's very, very important, or is moderately important? That's a very nice thing to see. And of course, this is a particular audience that has a stake in it and an interest in international affairs. But I think it also really parallels the set of results that we got from the public. So I'm going to switch to that. Here we go. Sorry, apologies. There we go. So we asked, how influential is Canada on the world stage, you think, today? Okay. So only 5% of the Canadians says that Canada is very influential today, and about 48% says moderately influential. So, slightly over half of Canadians think that Canada is at least moderately influential in the world, and that seems to be sort of more or less consistent. If you look at it, there are some demographics, for example, a man over 55 seems to have a lower rate of Canada's influence today. So they're more pessimistic about Canadian influence on world affairs today. On the other hand, women over 55 years old seems to be more optimistic about how influential Canada today. And as you can see here, for example, across different ideological spectrum, conservatives versus liberals. Liberals have a more positive view on how influential Canada is in the world today. 63% says that Canada is moderately influential. Compare that to the conservatives, who are about 30%, who says that Canada is moderately influential in the world. But overall, when you look at broadly, about slightly over half of Canadians think Canada is influential and on world stage, and that's an important thing to keep in mind. So when we declared Canada is back in 2015, slightly over half of the population agrees that there is some influence that Canada has in the world. But we also ask, and the same question that we ask you, how important is it that Canada be more influential in the world stage? And here, 22% says very important, and 50% says moderately important. Of course, given the selected nature of this audience, the numbers are much higher here today. But it is striking that 72% of Canadians believe that at least it's at least moderately important for them that Canada to be more influential than it is today. All right. So this is the basis of the claim that I made in the beginning of this presentation, that although we are a bit ambivalent about whether Canada is back or not, we do want Canada to be back. We want Canada to be more influential on world stage. Almost 72% of people want Canada to be at least moderately more influential. It's at least moderately important for them, for Canada to be moderately influential. And of course, there is a variety here across different demographics and across provinces. And of course, it doesn't really, when you look at the chart at the middle right there, foreign policy is not important at all for voting. So a segment of population who doesn't vote on foreign policy at all, this question has the lowest amount. And even among them, as you can see, about 43% believe that it is important, at least moderately important, for Canada to be influential in world politics. Now, this is the net impression scores for each country that we asked, highlighting there, and those are the numbers that I just talked about. Top two net impression scores are positive, minus, negative views on those countries. I will highlight China in a minute separately. But as you can see here, Russia and China have the highest net negative results on this map. United States also, I didn't put the data over here, but I'll be happy to talk about it. US has also a negative net impression score, but remember that we did this back in late September, early October. So President Trump has been, and their presidency has been a big factor on that. And we know from previous polling that who the president is in the United States matter a lot in terms of how Canadians perceive United States. So when we do this polling, hopefully again in the fall, I expect those numbers to flip with Biden presidency. But as you can see, the highest numbers belong to countries like Australia, 71% net, positive impression, which suggests a very small, almost nobody dislikes Australia in Canada. And other democracies such as UK and Germany and Japan and South Korea and Taiwan all have very positive scores. And those countries in the middle, as you see, Latvia, Ukraine, and Israel and India, have complicated histories, have complicated diaspora politics. That also plays out here in Canada as well. And in the case of Latvia, there's a lot of lack of information. So the biggest sort of amount, I don't have the data here to show you, but I'll be happy to bring it up later on. The biggest chunk of answers when it comes to Latvia was a neutral choice. So that suggests a lack of information about that country in order to form a positive or a negative impression of the country. So there is work that needs to be done to highlight the role of our allies and partners that we work closely with as Canadians, and in having the sort of the biggest Canadian deployment, at least that exists today in Latvia, for instance. There's a lot to talk about there. But even there, the positive results are quite important. Let me move to, I want to highlight here one specific country, and that is China, with regards to the views and opinions on China. As you see, only 1% of Canadians have very positive views on China, and 6% have moderately positive views. So in total, those who have moderately or more positive about China is only 7% of the population. And this is a radically, if you compare it with the previous polls and other polls, this is the difference is enormous. Even a few years back in 2014, 2015, you would have 40-50% positive ratings for China, and today it's only 7%. And 39% have a very negative view, and an additional 34% have a moderately negative view of China today. So that's a huge number, and as I said before, 73% of Canadians have at least a moderate negative view of China. And as you did have talks on the challenge China and Russia continue to present for Canada and Canadian interests, I will not belabor the point, but it's also important to point out that in the eyes of the Canadians, China is an adversary and have a very negative, I'll come to the threat perception in a minute, but have a very negative view of the country. And of course, the detention and kidnapping of two Michaels and continued bullying by the Chinese Communist Party and spying and all the other issues that are going on in Canada really feed into this issue of negative views. But this is quite a stark view, and in that sense, there is no way to equivocate here that broadly Canadians have a much more clear-eyed view of the threat China poses. And this is also, like I said, across the board, across provinces, across different demographics and partisan relations. It's the same, pretty much, as you can see. The Conservatives and the NDP voters, for instance, are not really that different in terms of their assessment of China today. And here are the countries seen as a serious threat to Canada. And we have China as 44%, the highest level of perception as a serious threat. Russia second, Iran third, and United States, as I said, was fourth, and that almost 1/5 of Canadians perceive U.S. as a serious threat. But as I said, there's a lot to do with the presidency of Donald Trump there on that moment. Okay, as you can see, how much of a threat? Serious threat, 44%. A moderate threat, 35%. How much of a threat China is. So when you combine those two, you have a 79% threat perception across the board. So both a negative view and a high threat perception among Canadians when it comes to China. So the policies it suggests is, to me at least, quite clear. Now, what I want to do before moving on, Canadians' views on international organizations, is to ask you the same question. So a question will pop up on your screen. Of the following 7 organizations, which one do you believe is the most important for Canada to actively support? Just choose one, please. Again, let's give maybe 30 seconds, 45 seconds for people to be able to vote. And then we will switch to similar results and have a look at how Canadians view these different organizations. I will not be able to cover all of them, but I will be talking some of them. I think we can see the results. Excellent. So we have, for the 61% of the audience, NATO is the most important organization that we need to actively support, closely followed by Five Eyes organization, and then the rest comes. UN on 6%, the rest of 6%, and the WHO and European Union didn't get any votes, which these scores are again in line with the broader public, only a bit more enhanced, perhaps a bit more more intense, given the special interest that this audience have on international affairs. But it's quite nice to see that. Those are, as you can see, NATO and Five Eyes net impression scores. Highest net impression, positive net impression score belonging to the Five Eyes Alliance. 51% net positive, which suggests a higher number of positive scores. But when you take out the negative impressions, net impression scores were 51%, closely followed by NATO at 45%. So in terms of the views that Canadians have on these organizations, those two tops, right? Those two are the most positively viewed by Canadians: Five Eyes Alliance and NATO. Others, such as European Union and UN and so on and so forth, all come afterwards. The G7 and WTO do suffer from lack of visibility and lack of awareness by the majority of the Canadians. So the scores tend to be a bit lower over there. As you can see here, with regards to the NATO, we have about 54% positive or moderately positive views on NATO, more or less the same across different demographics. The only difference here is the women between 18 to 34, and actually we are putting together a project to explore why younger women have mostly neutral views on our most important alliance, NATO, and we would like to really sort of explore that question going forward. And this is again same true across the board, and gets even more with this audience as well. High information, high international knowledge score, high IKS. If you look at it on the far right of your screen, those with the high, well informed about international affairs, have the highest level of or have the most positive views of on NATO. As you can see there, it's over 73% over there as a positive, compared to 54% of the general public, and which is very much similar to the results we have here. United Nations, I'm showing this up because there is, as you shall see in a minute, there is a bit of a change here. Although there is broad support across the board, there is some partisan divide, as you can notice here, between conservatives and liberals. Liberals have much higher levels of positive views on United Nations, and that number is lowest among conservatives with 36%. Still, not too far off from the general population. So there are partisan divides and some gender and provincial divides across the board, but there are themes that we can continue to observe. And here are Five Eyes Alliance. Again, across the board support with high levels of neutral views, suggesting lack of information among women between 18 to 34. But apart from that, quite broadly, as you can see, that 58% of Canadians have a positive or at least a very positive or moderately positive views of the Five Eyes. And this holds true across different demographics as well. And this is the last question I would like to ask before I switch to talk about what foreign policy Canada should follow, because I want to leave space and time for questions and answers. Do you think Canada should stand with and up for democracies around the world, even if it is not in our strategic interest or if it does not line up with the UN policies? In other words, should we stand out with democracies around the world and stand with them, even if it is not serving our interest, or even if it goes against the UN, even if we go against others? Should we do that or not? Yes or no? And then we'll be able to talk about the second part of this talk: what kind of foreign policy Canadians want to see. Yes, let's see the result. Okay, lovely, 50-50. That's excellent, actually, because it's for a researcher, these kind of results are quite interesting because it gives you an ability to interrogate more and talk about more. And once we get into Q&A, I would really love to hear for those who say both yes and no, to see why they think in these terms. And I think it is important because, again, this is a sophisticated audience that knows international relations, that understands and follows it quite closely. And the question itself suggests a trade-off, right? So it is it's a qualified question. It suggests that should we stand with and up for democracies, even if it isn't necessarily an extremely important part of the world for us, or even if it means going against the major international organization, the UN. So it is a qualified question. It is a question that suggests that should we pursue this as a matter of principle, or even if it is not in our national interest in a way. So it is and this is quite a sophisticated crowd, and I think it reflects that that weighing of options in this question. And I want to show you the results. The results are not too far off from what we have discussed here. I'll come back to this in 1 second, but let me show you the results for this first, and then get back to the key takeaways. So when we ask it in two ways. We ask, what is your opinion of Canada's willingness to stand up for democracies in parts of the world where we have limited strategic interests? About 17% have a very positive view, and 41% have a moderately positive view for Canada's willingness to do this. Right? So when you combine them, you have 58% having the willingness to support other democracies, even we have limited strategic interest, which is not too far off from the 50% mark that we had with this group here. And this holds pretty much true across the board in different demographics, more or less the same. I'll come back here in 1 second. But the second way we ask the question, which we combined for you here, is that Canada should more often side with alliance of democracies rather than always go along with what multilateral organizations like the UN want. And here it's exactly 50% moderately agree or strongly agree with this statement. So it is actually reflective when you combine those to 58% and 50% here. We are actually very close to what this audience suggested when it comes to standing with and up for democracies around the world, even if that means going against others. Let me go back to the key takeaways here, and then go really quickly in 5 minutes over some of these data, and then open up for questions and answers. One of the things like I said overall before, we have half of the population and slightly over half of the population supporting that we need to stand with and up for democracies around the world. And that actually also reflects here in the audience as well. There's at least 50% of support. And I think it's important to note, because the way we ask the question is clearly suggesting that even if it is not in our national interest. So of course, when it is in our national interest, there is the overlap and there will be support for it. But even if it means incurring costs and acting on principle, half of Canadians believe that we should continue to do so. And of course, much more, as we shall see in the results in a minute, much more when if it is in our interest, right? So there is a strong democracy bias here, I would say. There is an overwhelming support among the public for building a closer relationship with democracies in the Indo-Pacific, and that we should be much more active in NATO. The majority also thinks that we should provide the necessary resources for our armed forces and for the Defense Department to protect our interests. The majority thinks the defense spending should be kept at the same level or increased. And it's about 1/3 on each way, and I'll show you in a minute with the results. There's a broad support for the government's stated foreign policy goals. We asked them those 4 goals that are put on Global Affairs Canada's website, and strengthening Canada's place in North America being the most important. But there is a very broad, high level of support, north of 80% on those 4 goals. And lastly, we did ask how important foreign policy is for you. And although the number of foreign policy voters are small, about 50% of the general population, more and more people say that foreign policy will be important, will be more important for them when they're voting in the next election, which shall come at the end of this presentation. We have already went through the democracy support component here. As you can see, across the board, there's broad support. There are only a few demographics that are not paying much attention to this, and naturally, those who said that foreign policy is not important at all for their voting, generally 54% says that they're neutral on this particular question. But if you take that out, it's broadly the same, and the higher knowledge of information, the higher those numbers go up. And that is, again, true across the board for different demographics. Younger women having the highest number of don't know or neutral questions, over half of them. And that's one of the reasons why we are developing this project, to be able to reach out to that particular demographic on NATO, on international affairs, on our engagement with other democracies in the world, and to understand why they feel that they don't necessarily have an opinion or feel lack of information. How can we change that? I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. Okay, here we go. The other question, like we asked, as I said, is Canada. We asked whether you agree with this or not. Canada should be much more active in the NATO alliance with North America and Europe, and we have very strong support for that. As you can see, 2/3 of Canadians, 66%, more than that actually, have 60%, 61% of Canadians believe that we should be much more active, take a bigger role in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That seems to be, the positive, or at least moderately, those who moderately agree, seems to be the same across different demographics and across provinces and other groups that we look at. And of course, it increases with the information about international affairs as well. I'll be happy to come back to all these in a minute. And this is the other component that I talk about in the key takeaways. We said Canada should build closer relationship with other democratic countries in the Indo-Pacific region, and 17% said they strongly agree with it. Another 50% said they moderately agree with this. And we have, again, 2/3 of Canadians agreeing that we need to build closer relationship with democratic countries in the Indo-Pacific, including countries like South Korea, India, Taiwan, and others as we move forward. And this, again, holds broadly across different provinces and demographic groups. We gave Canadians the defense spending question, both as an actual amount, $22 billion, and as a percentage of the federal spending on national defense. And we said, do you think this should be increased or decreased? 10% said increased significantly, 24% said increased moderately, 46% said kept at the same level. So when you combine those two, you have 34% advocating for at least a moderate increase in the defense spending, and about 46% saying at least we should keep it at the same level. I think this is quite important to keep in mind, because as we shall see, things that the Canadians want their government to do has a lot to do with resources that are available to them. But the fact that we have 46%, almost half of the population wants to keep it at least on the current levels, and about a third of the population that wants to increase defense spending is something to keep in mind across the board. Those numbers are again generally the same across the board, with differences in Quebec and younger women having lower support for increased defense spending compared to others in Canada. We also asked the four, and this is the sort of the last point I would like to make here, the four stated foreign policy goals of the government: revitalizing the rules-based international order, broad support across the board, as you can see, 80% support this particular goal. Eradicating poverty, it's even higher, 86% of Canadians think this is very important, or at least moderately important for Canada to pursue. Pursuing diversified, modern, and inclusive trade. This is quite high in terms of support. 89% of Canadians support this particular foreign policy goal. And strengthening Canada's place in North America has the highest level of support among Canadians. 91% of Canadians believe that this foreign policy goal is moderately important or very important for Canada. And lastly, we talked about how important foreign policy to you when you're voting. 14% says very important. These are the foreign policy voters, but another 53% says that it is moderately important. So when you combine them, we have a 67% population that at least gives some importance in their voting when they vote, give importance to foreign policy when they're in the booth. And this is, there are differences. I'll be happy to come back here in a minute. And when we ask that, whether it will be more or less important in the next election, regardless of what level you are, 28% said that it's going to be more important. So this is an important jump. 15% for 15% is very important anyway. And then you have across different provinces and demographic groups, we have almost a third of Canadians saying that foreign policy will be more important for their voting decision in the next federal election. And I'll be happy to come back to the individual ones. So, looking at this, what might be an emerging foreign policy consensus among the public could look like. A resolve to stand shoulder to shoulder with democracies from around the world. Particularly, and if you take all of them into account, the positive views of our democratic allies, such as Australia and Germany and the UK, as well as Japan and Taiwan and South Korea and others. Proactively bolstering the Euro-Atlantic community, the high levels of support, and a desire to be more active in NATO, while strengthening Canada's ties with fellow democracies in the Indo-Pacific, and spending commensurate amounts on defense to assert Canada's interests, while keeping in mind there are partisan divides in terms of the support for international organizations, as well as differences across gender and age on issues such as securing a seat at the United Nations Security Council, which I didn't show up here, as well as increasing defense spending. There is a broader emerging consensus there. And this is important to note this is not really that far off from the traditional priorities of securing Canada's role in North America, expanding trade, and helping those in need, while reinforcing the rules-based international order that makes these goals possible. And there is a broad, from 80% to 91% support for these goals as we move forward. However, and this is my last word before turning it over to the Q&A, the question, the proof is in the pudding, right? The question of whether the politicians, the policymakers, are willing to undertake the inescapable rethinking of foreign policy, reorienting our foreign policy towards support with other democracies in the Atlantic area as well as in the Pacific, and having a greater role in the world. And that devote the necessary resources that are necessary to succeed in such a rethinking of foreign policy. And whether the public is truly ready to pay them. That is, in other words, whether they are also ready to walk the walk and not only talk the talk, remains to be seen. And I think that would be an excellent point to stop. I did share the presentation, and you can email me as well. I'll be happy to share the presentation as well. And you can go to the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and we have 3 releases of the data with commentary attached, where you can find a whole data set as well as analysis, my analysis of what it means over there. Please feel free to send me questions or comments and reach out to me if you want to further this conversation. I'll stop the sharing right now and we'll turn it over to Dan. Thank you very much.
Well, Balkan, thank you very much. That was excellent. I confess that I had an opportunity to review your reports prior to tonight's event, and I really think there's some very interesting insights that can be gleaned from this. I more than suspect that I hope that the Conservative Party convention that's coming up soon, that whoever is going to take the foreign and defense file on behalf of the Conservative Party has a look at this material, because I think they can learn a great deal from it. Though in some respects, one might argue that there aren't a great many surprises, in the sense that there seems to be a general conformity to what we might see in the general conversation of Canadians. But I think there's a lot of very important and subtle differences between different demographics and geographical locations and so on that are very telling for Canada. So, if I may, let me start off the Q&A with a question that I find interesting, which is that there seems to be some kind of a dichotomy, and you hinted at this in terms of the growing importance, but there seems to be a dichotomy of thinking around, on the one hand, that voting, taking into account foreign affairs and foreign policy into voting, is on the one hand not necessarily all that important, and yet on the other hand, the desire to see Canada be more influential in the world seems to be quite important. So how do we reconcile those two things? Is it because we think, or the quote unquote average Canadian, whoever that might be, doesn't believe they have much influence on the ability of the government to actually change foreign policy? I wonder if you have any thoughts on that idea.
I mean, I think that's, when it comes to public opinion, one, especially when you look at the public opinion polls and ask a variety of questions, ourselves acting is the same way. Sometimes the answers seem to be contradictory, or at least consistent across the board, and I think that's normal. Partly because you ask people and they say okay, and then they don't necessarily link those questions to one another. But the second thing is, for years, for decades, Canadians broadly can be complacent, can have the luxury not to think about international affairs, because we are in a way, we are blessed with a geography and resources that mostly keeps us away from trouble. And, 3 oceans and the world's only superpower, which we more or less have a good set of relationship. And therefore, for the majority of people, that link between a stable, prosperous, open international system and Canada's well-being and prosperity, that link wasn't that clear, and therefore people don't necessarily vote on foreign policy issues because of the comfort that we are in, and that we were generally taken care of by the virtue of our alliance with the United States and the international system that it created after the Second World War, and that we are away from the hotspots of the world. Now, the things started to change, and I think Canadians also start realizing that international system is much more uncertain. United States is increasingly turning inwards and trying to deal with the problems at home, and the system, that liberal world order that was established after the end of the Second World War, in the West at least, and then its expansion after the end of Cold War, is now under threat by authoritarian regimes like Russia and China, and regional authoritarian actors such as Iran or Turkey or others. So we do have an increasingly less certain, less secure international order. And Canada can no longer, in that sense, count on the old habits that we will be taken care of, more or less, and we don't have to worry about it. So I think the people are slowly realizing that. And that's why, although until now, only about 14% of Canadians attached a very important role of foreign policy in their voting, almost a third of them says that for the next election, it will be more important to them. So there is, in that sense, I think, changing attitude towards foreign policy. And I agree with your first comment that there is a broad consensus, despite there are differences, partisan, provincial, as well as gender and age differences on specific issues. The broad contours of what Canadian foreign policy should be is quite stable. And as my colleague at MLI, Christian Lubrecht, Professor Christian Lubrecht, suggested in one of the commentaries, and I quoted him, saying that Canadian interests are relatively immutable. Foreign policy interests are relatively immutable, and that just shows within the public. So the differences then is to what extent the government and the ruling, the policymakers would pay attention to the shifting understandings when it comes to the primacy of which country poses the biggest threat, and what Canada should do to protect its interests and values abroad. But what should be protected is, I think, broadly agreed among Canadians, and the results show that too.
Balkan, before delving down into a couple more specific questions, I wonder if, and I realize this wasn't really the focus of your study, but I'm wondering, was there at any point in your research where you were also trying to compare, pardon me, the importance of foreign policy per se against other issues that Canadians often think about, such as healthcare, the economy, etc.? Was that part of that?
No, we didn't ask that question, and I think that's a very good point. I guess that has to be really a part of. I mean, this poll was mostly on understanding Canadians' attitudes towards international affairs and foreign policy, but I think I really like that idea of asking, making trade-offs between among a set of policy priorities, domestic and foreign, and see how Canadians allocate those resources and how they prioritize among those different goals. Would be a very interesting thing to ask, and would give us a more realistic understanding of whether people are ready to walk or just talk to talk when you ask a specific question. Right. And I think I'll take that I'll take that as a note, and then when we do this, hopefully back again in fall, I might actually put that as a question.
Okay.
And ask, well, this is how can you prioritize among them, and so we get a better sense.
Exactly. Someone asked the question, and you commented on it, and it stood out. Was the results from females under 35 that seem to have either no interest or no knowledge of these issues, and this is something that you've decided as a researcher to kind of zero in on. But do you have any early thoughts on why that might be the case?
Frankly, I don't, and I want to research that. I want to get into that more. So we're putting together a project to follow up on that and talk with people, and actually want to talk broadly. So not only in order to avoid selection bias, not only go and talk with younger women, women under 35, who are already involved in international affairs, such as people who are involved with RCMI or with NATO association, or with us MLI, or with other think tanks like CG and others, are already interested in it. So it's kind of not the point to reach out to them. What we want to do is broadly across Canada, and in both in French and in English. We want to do a series of meetings and in groups to understand whether is it lack of information, lack of interest, a different set of priorities, whether they don't see themselves reflected or their interests reflected in the foreign policy debates. So we want, it's an empirical question for me, and I would like to get in and involved. And if any one of our participants here might have some insights, I'll be very happy to hear that as well.
Certainly take into account, and I'm sure you're well aware of this, the organization called Women in International Security, WISE. Now they will be a biased group because they're obviously by definition interested in that field. But it would be curious to see if the results from an organization such as that, mirrors a different cohort within the larger Canadian framework. So I think that's a good thing. I do have a question about. I think it kind of in a roundabout way speaks to Canadian concerns about China, and that seems to be an enhanced awareness of the cyber threats that these countries are posing, China and Russia. Do you think that the discussion in the media perhaps is contributing to Canadians' perception of China and Russia?
So. I believe so. In that sense, increasing reports raise the awareness among the Canadians of these two authoritarian regimes and the threat they pose to both Canadian interests abroad, to our allies abroad, but also here at home, domestically. This includes disinformation campaigns. My colleague Marcus Kolga, that you had here two meetings before, has done excellent work on that and continue to do so. What is this Disinfo Watch on particularly on Russian disinformation, but increasingly on Chinese disinformation. We know in a recent speech, CSIS, the head of CSIS went ahead and identify China and Russia as the primary state adversaries, and the way they engage in espionage here in Canada, and blackmailing and bullying Canadians here at home, both Chinese Canadians and Russian Canadians and others. So I think all these come together, both and the media is from Globe to others, are increasingly making these known, and Canadians are aware of these threats, and that they are not over there. These threats are not over there, but here. That very close at home, I think, contributes to that clear-eyed understanding of who our adversaries are.
Balkan, let me close, if I may, with one question, which perhaps you can address, and that was, there were two geographical regions that it appears that your study did not address. One was Africa, and the other one was the Caribbean. And Canada has had a fair bit of involvement in both of those regions, both in terms of economic involvement, but also military involvement.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, was there a reason why those regions were not considered in your study, and would you consider going back to them?
Yes.
That is to say, from the perspective of what Canadians imagine about those regions.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, there are two basic reasons. Both of them are quite practical reasons. One was the size of the study. So when we asked, we wanted to have questions that involve both adversaries, but also our allies, and see how they are being perceived, as well as Canadian missions such as in Latvia, for example, perceived. And we already get to like 15 countries. So when you increase those numbers, say when you ask people to give their views on 30 countries, for instance, you get your results started to suffer, and then you have, so there are limitations on how much attention people can keep on those set of questions. And of course, one way would be to increase the number of participants, etc. But there's a funding issue, it's a logistical issue primarily, to be honest. But yes, definitely we are missing. We're missing questions on what, not only Africa, but also Latin America and other places as well. And I think that's something that needs to be done. And I'll be very happy to talk if someone is interested in sponsoring such a study, and I'll be happy to set it up.
Perhaps just as a final note, I mean, it's not illogical to make the connection between the degree of media coverage, for example, such that it influences, the population's perception of a space like China or Russia. We probably have a rather diminished, and I might be technically incorrect in this, but maybe a diminished relationship or perhaps support of our foreign service, our government diplomats around the world, in terms of the reporting that goes on, which I think would ultimately influence how Canadians feel about different regions, again, such as Africa, the Caribbean. I think that might also be something in the future that we might want to think about in terms of how do we further educate Canadians about what's going on in the world, in the absence or perhaps the diminishment of what Global Affairs Canada is actually producing and generating and getting into the media to try to stimulate those conversations. So I won't ask you at the moment for your own view on that, but I think that's certainly something that seems to fall out of the kinds of research that you're doing, which was quite excellent.
Thank you very much. I totally agree with that. Yes.
Yeah, it was wonderful. So let me wrap up, if I may. It's a little bit after 8 o'clock now, and I'm sure some people somewhere want to go and have dinner. I don't know. I always have dinner before I engage in these. But I think this is tremendous research that you've done, and again, a lot of insights, a lot of threads can be pulled from these various polls. And if someone is serious in the political world that wants to gain some leverage and some insight into this file, this is the place, in my view, they ought to start. So I thank you very, very much for that. As I have said since the beginning of this year, my firm desire is to meet you in person at the RCMI as soon as possible. This is becoming more and more necessary every day. I think we're getting closer.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. But you will be my guest as soon as that's possible. Let me, if I may, as well, thank my two colleagues, Sylvia Lau and Eric Morris. Sylvia is the center of gravity in the virtual world of the RCMI, makes all of this happen. And so I thank her very much for all the work that she does behind the scenes. And she's always very responsive and very willing. I don't know if tonight is the first time that we actually put an online poll or online survey with the RCMI, but I think as time goes on, we're going to be experimenting more and more. And poor Sylvia is going to be pulling her hair out, going, "Please don't come out with any more good ideas." But we will continue to push the limit. So Sylvia, thank you very much. Eric Morse is absolutely essential as well to the RCMI as Chief of Communications, and with all the marketing and the flyers and whatnot. It's extremely important because we're really trying hard to reach out to our membership and beyond our membership during these COVID-19 times. We need to do that to make those connections. But I think this is something we're going to continue to do in the future anyways, because we were able to bring someone like yourself who's sitting in Ottawa to us with relative ease. And I think this is something we want to continue to do in the future. So I don't think this is going to go away even in a post-COVID environment. The last thing I would like to do is remind you to look online at what we're doing next month. Normally, as you know, we would be holding a conference at the RCMI in the dining room. We can't do that, but we're taking our conference online on April the 20th. The subject is going to be climate change and implications for Canadian security and beyond. And we have engaged 4 top-notch experts from the United States, from NATO and Canada. We're going to talk about different aspects of this, and it's a very important subject. So what we have done in effect is we have looked at the first 2 sessions, threats and challenges from state actors. We've taken a look tonight under the expert direction of Dr. Balkan Devlen at how Canadians feel about our foreign policy, which is largely targeted towards states and towards international organizations. And our conference dealing with climate change is going to talk about something which is a global challenge that extends well beyond international organizations, well beyond state actors, but is something that is happening. It's not a question of is it happening or not happening? It is happening. And the question is, how is it going to affect Canadian national security going forward in the next few years and decades? So we invite you to look for that and look forward to seeing you online. And if I may say again, thank you very much, Balkan, for your wonderful presentation. And thanks again to Sylvia and Eric. And ladies and gentlemen, please have a great evening wherever you may be. And I look forward to seeing you at the Long Bar at the RCMI in the very, very near future. Thank you very much, and good night.
This has been another in our series of webcasts produced by the Royal Canadian Military Institute in Toronto as a public educational service. You can find news of upcoming events and links to our webcast archives at www.rcmi.org. On behalf of the RCMI, this is Eric Morse saying goodbye for now, and thank you for joining us.